Netcasts you love.
From people you trust.
This is Twit.
Bandwidth for Triangulation is brought to you by CacheFly at CACHEFLY.com. This is Triangulation, episode 235, recorded Monday, January 25th, 2016. Bill Fernandez, Apple employee number 4. Triangulation is brought to you by Epson's new EcoTank printers. With Epson's line of Super Tank all-in-one printers, you can print thousands of documents without running out of ink. EcoTank is loaded and ready to print when you are. Visit epson.com/ecotank to find out more. And by Automatic, the connected car company that improves your driving and integrates your car into your digital life. For more information, visit automatic.com/twit and enter the code TWIT to get 20% off your purchase. And by Wealthfront. Wealthfront is a low-cost automated investment service that is the most sophisticated way for you to invest your money. Whether you've got millions or you're just starting out, visit wealthfront.com/triangulation to sign up and get your free personalized investment portfolio. That's wealthfront.com/triangulation. It's time for Triangulation, the show where we get together with some of the most interesting people in technology, and we pick their brains and we learn, and it's always my favorite way to begin the week, and we have a great one I've been looking forward to for a long time, but I've called in the reinforcements on this one. Joining us for our show today, Mike Elgan. It's great to see you again.
Great to see you. I'll do my best to reinforce.
You're wearing the cult pendant.
Yes, I joined a cult. It's a very nice cult. Nice folks. This is actually the new Narrative Clip 2. Came out, shipped last month. It's the one that you have, but it's like they sort of tweaked it.
I had the original one.
That's right.
And what are they, Norwegian or something?
They are Swedish.
Swedish.
And it's a really interesting company that now have a San Francisco office. And what's fascinating about this, I think, their story of this company is the Kickstarter for the one that you bought.
Yeah, that's what I kickstarted.
5 hours, they met their goal.
Yeah.
5 hours, and then they wrote.
We should tell people what you do. This is a camera that's taking pictures every few seconds.
That's right. And Bill may appreciate this. We're going to talk to Bill in a second. But this is a very Apple-esque product. No buttons. Has a touch interface. And it just automatically takes pictures every 10 seconds, 15 seconds, 30, whatever. You can set it to an interval. It'll take 4,000 pictures. So there's lots of pictures. It also now takes HD video.
And it stores them in the cloud.
It stores them in the cloud, but it uploads them with Wi-Fi as soon as you plug it in to charge it. It just automatically goes. There's no setting, there's no dealing with that stuff. It just automatically. And then they have a social network called Explore, and they have Google-like artificial intelligence that's able to pick the better pictures to highlight and your sort of Explore post. It's a really good company. They kind of got a bad reputation because it was kind of hard to use. It was kind of invasive. We live in a new world now.
You've traded in your Google Glass for your narrative.
That's right, exactly. This is a little more socially acceptable.
Well, do people when they look at it, what did they say?
Nobody has noticed it or said anything about it.
I wore my the first one to the gym and stuff, into the locker room, and I thought, I'm gonna get something from this, and nothing, nobody, because they don't know. You just look like, frankly, you're a hippie.
Yeah, there's something wrong with you, clearly, but they don't know what it is exactly.
Anything.
They don't know that they're involved in it.
So let's introduce our guest, because I'm so excited to have him. Apple employee number 4. He introduced, or is credited, we'll find out, with introducing Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak back when they were at Homestead High. He is an user interface architect, worked on some of the best products Apple ever did. And we are so thrilled to have Bill Fernandez join us on the show today. Welcome, Bill.
Thank you. It's wonderful to be here.
Bill's in Albuquerque, the city you have to spell before you can move there.
That's right.
And that's no mean feat, I might add. Bill, it's so great to have you. Welcome.
Thank you.
Is it true? Did you introduce Woz and Jobs?
I did. They were 2 of my electronics buddies, and I thought that, being interested in electronics, I'd like to meet each other.
That's pretty cool.
Bill, now, when Steve Jobs passed away, I wrote a kind of a long piece about what he meant and why he was so important to all of us. And one of the things that I wrote was that he was a pure personification of Silicon Valley. He was a product of the Valley as much as Apple was. And the only person that I've ever known in the industry who is more of a pure Silicon Valley person is you. Your parents met at Stanford. You grew up in Sunnyvale.
Yes.
Your entire street apparently was filled with electronics engineers. What was it like when you were a kid growing up in Silicon Valley?
Well, it was a typical suburban street from the physical standpoint, and we had families with kids riding their bicycles up and down the street, and the various parents sort of taking turns watching them or playing with them. It was a very safe street, but it was populated by a lot of electronic engineers. I sometimes wish it had been populated by a bunch of cabinet makers because I love woodworking, but they were electronic engineers. So whereas my brother, for example, would go up and down the street playing with his friends, I would go up and down the street getting mentored in electronics from the different dads, like Steve Wozniak's father, Jerry Wozniak, and Eldon Giles, who lived down at the end of the street, the father of my brother's best friend.
Yeah, it's kind of funny. My own son, we lived in Silicon Valley for a while, and he came home one day and said, "Yeah, my friend's dad has 10 Hummers." This was years ago.
I know who his friend's dad is.
And he said, yeah, and he also bought all the computers for our school. He was in middle school at the time, and I said, "What's your friend's name?" And he's like, "Gary." Gary what? Gary Wozniak. Anyway, it's interesting to grow up in the Valley even today. Now, you one of the things that's really interesting about your background is, I think, best expressed by Forbes magazine, which said there are 3 great garages in the Valley. The first great garage is HP, the HP garage, where HP was founded, and really Silicon Valley was born to a certain extent. The Apple garage, of course, famously. And your garage, according to this article.
Wow, that's pretty good company.
Technically owned by your parents.
Yes, of course.
And this is the place where you and Woz built the cream soda computer. Can you tell us about the cream soda computer?
Sure. We were able to go to electronics companies, and usually you could talk to the application engineers, the engineers who were hired by those companies to create application notes to tell engineers how to use their integrated circuits. And you could talk to them and say, "Look, I'm a student and I'm trying to learn this stuff. Do you have any reject parts that I could have?" And Woz once went to an engineer at, I think, Signetics, which was then one of the major integrated circuit manufacturers making digital integrated circuits. And he came home with like a double handful of integrated circuits. So we sat down on my mom's living room carpet, and we sort of sorted them out. We got little envelopes and put them in each one and wrote the numbers on them, and then looked them up in the catalog to see what they were. And we had gates of different kinds and inverters and multiplexers and some arithmetic logic units. And after a while, Woz said, "You know, we've got enough parts here to build a computer." And so that's what we did.
Wow.
He did most of the design work, and I did most of the assembly work. And on a board, you know, maybe about this big, we put all the chips, and then I had a little power supply that I'd built out of surplus parts that we hooked it up to. And I built a little framework for it that had switches and lights so that we could put things in and get things out. And we wired it up in my garage.
That's amazing.
And what happened to it?
Yeah, where is it now?
Yeah, what is it has an interesting ending, this story.
Well, there are a couple of stages of what happened to it. Woz's mom was always interested in getting him in the news whenever he did something interesting. And this was interesting. So she arranged to have the San Jose Mercury, the local newspaper, send a reporter and a photographer. And they came, and we had the computer on its little framework on Woz's floor in his little bedroom, and the power supply in its framework on next to it. And the reporters came in, we turned it on. And now, usually when electronics goes bad, nothing happens. But this time, the power supply actually emitted smoke.
Oh.
And
makes
my
for a better story, though.
Yeah, it's a better story.
My surplus electronic integrated circuit that was the voltage regulator had lost its mind and sent too much voltage to all the circuitry in the computer.
Oh.
So both the power supply smoked and the computer was destroyed.
Tragic. I had heard somewhere that the reporter stepped on something, or it was the fault of the reporter, but that's not true.
No.
But the reporter did get a. Well, did they write that story, or did they? They say, "Oh, thanks, kids."
There was nothing to show them, so they just sort of said, "Oh, well, sorry, but you know," and they left. And
That's
we were left to
hysterical.
sadly contemplate our handiwork.
You know, I think I just got the new Raspberry Pi just came in the mail, and I'm just thinking it's about the same size.
Yeah.
You know, there was something magical. I was in Santa Cruz High at the same time. We're the same age. And there was something magical about the Valley.
Yeah.
There was definitely a creative. Do you feel that way, Bill? Like there was a creative ferment going on at the time. Did you see this coming?
Well, let me say that at Apple, when Woz and Jobs incorporated Apple and it started to become a real company, and they hired me, and I started driving over to Steve Jobs' garage. See, I'd grown up. Instead of riding my bicycle over, I was driving my little truck over. There was magic in the air at Apple.
You knew.
Because so many of us had been, no, I felt.
Yeah.
There so many of us had been dreaming for so many years of being able to create your own computer and for people to be able to have their own computers, that now we were making a computer that people could own and people could have and people could use. And every day something new was happening. For example, Woz would come back to the garage from the Homebrew Computer Club, and he'd say, "You've got to see this great color demo that this little high school kid named Chris Espinosa wrote." And he'd show something on the screen that would do amazing things. Well, that was a little later than the beginning, but it was very early in it. It was is an example of kind of like the magicalness of that period of time.
Everything was new. Yeah. It was fresh, and for the first time ever, you had your hands on it. You didn't have to go to the priesthood, go to the basement.
Well, it's not only new, it was empowering.
Yeah.
A dream that many technologists throughout the world, and particularly concentrated in Silicon Valley, which is why they had the Homebrew Computer Club.
Right.
We had hundreds of people there meeting together because they wanted to build their own computers. And they were saying, well, I got this old core memory from IBM that it was thrown out, and I've got this module or this assembly from DEC, and I want to see if there's some way I can cob them together to make it do something, okay? Well, we were going leaps and bounds beyond that by saying, okay, here is this one circuit. You can wire it together, and everything is there.
Yeah, amazing.
And then later, Jobs said, well, there's so much interest in this. Let's make the printed circuit boards and stuff it with the parts. Let's assemble the computer, and then all people will have to do is buy it. So that empowers an even less technical layer of people. So we were finally making it possible for this dream of people having their own computers to actually come true.
And that was the invention of the personal computer. Now, one of the interesting things about your career is that you worked not only on the Apple I and the Apple II, you later worked on the Macintosh. We'll get into the Macintosh in a little while. But on the Apple I and II, you were both a hardware engineer. You later specialized in UI design. So you've done so many things on so many different iconic computers. But can you tell us about what your role was exactly on the Apples I and II?
Sure. Well, to be correct, I was an electronic technician. And I was an electronic technician for maybe 15 years. Eventually, I grew into being an electronic engineer, although without a degree. And then I turned to programming and wrote software for Apple. And then I took up user interface design. And user interface design is what I've been doing professionally for the past maybe 30 years, both at Apple and then at other companies. Okay, so when Woz and Jobs incorporated and Jobs' father converted half of their garage to be Apple Computer, setting up workbenches and things, I was the gopher and the jack of all trades. I was the person who was always sent out to pick up parts from distributors, who was wiring things up, who was repairing things, who was breadboarding things. At one point, to be professional, we wanted to put a whole bunch of Apple I's into a cabinet of some sort that was heated up and that was under power. And so they would run for a day or two, and that's called burning in, so that any early failures would fail in the box, and then we could repair them, knowing that we would send out a reliable product. And this is the sort of thing that Hewlett-Packard would do. They would burn in their products and then fix the early failures before shipping them. Okay, so this was a huge kind of quality thing. And I built that box.
Oh, neat.
And I had to figure out how do you supply power to 20 boards, and how do you create a box that makes it easy to slide them in and out? How do you get the temperature, warm enough but not too warm? So that's an example of the jack of all trades sort of things that I did.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
That's in the garage age.
And Woz had been working at HP. Was he influenced by HP's methods in setting up Apple?
Well, we were all influenced by Hewlett-Packard because it was really the standard bearer of technical excellence, of creating excellent products. Products that performed exceedingly well, that were the best in the world, that were extremely reliable, and so forth. So building excellent products in all the ways they need to be truly excellent was something that we all wanted to do. I think that Woz, who was the engineer who designed the circuitry, he had always wanted to be technically excellent. His father was a mathematician and an engineer, and he wanted to be as good as his father. He wanted to be known as an outstanding engineer. And so in addition to having the example of Hewlett-Packard as excellent engineering, it was also kind of in his DNA, to pursue excellence. He also had an amazing mind, an ability to do things that other people did in different ways that were much more efficient. So, for example, when we had the Apple II and we were saving programs onto cassette tapes and loading them back from cassette tapes, which is slow and a little bit unreliable, and when small floppy disk drives came on the market, we wanted to have a floppy drive for the Apple computer. So he designed a floppy disk controller. But he approached it in an entirely different way than anyone else. Yeah. So instead of making a floppy disk controller that had 70 integrated circuits, his had 6.
Yeah.
Amazing. And on the Apple II, one of the things, speaking of Woz's approach to things, he did a lot of his designs in his head, which is amazing. And that's probably one of the things that made him fast and efficient. But it's not great when you're trying to manufacture these things at scale. So you were given, as the jack of all trades, you were given the task of actually reverse engineering the Apple II for Apple so that it could be manufactured.
It could make it.
What was that process like?
Well, it was helpful that Woz and I had worked on the cream soda computer. So I learned that he would produce these very abstract or simplistic sketches that just showed kind of the essence. And saying, okay, and do all the other stuff here that needs to be done to make that work.
It's as if you're like Beethoven says, it goes a little bit like this, da 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 da, and you have to make a symphony.
And so I got Woz's sort of sketchy schematics on letter-sized sheets of paper in purple flares, because he said all true engineers use purple flares, because that was his pen of the year, or the pen of that era in his life.
I remember.
And I would look at them and I would say, okay, I know how to expand this into a full schematic that has all the parts and all the wirings that everyone else would need to understand it. So that's what I did. I redrew his like 5 letter-sized sheets of paper with cryptic diagrams into something that was, I think, 3 D-sized sheets of paper. And a D-sized sheet of paper is like 6 or 8 letter-sized sheets of paper. Oh, so I had like 3 of those, and you set them all next to each other like a triptych, and the wires would cross the page boundaries, and you'd have a complete schematic.
Do you use a T-square and draw it, or how? I mean?
Yeah. And those were the days before CAD. So I had these giant pieces of vellum graph paper, and with a drafting pencil, a traditional drafting pencil, and a ruler, so cool. I just did all these things. And a little template where you could draw and make circles, and make rectangles by drawing inside the template. Yeah.
Was your sense that you're working with this brilliant genius, Woz, or was he just your buddy?
It was just my buddy.
Yeah. Or you're doing something fun. I like it, too, that you were scratching your own itch. I mean, you and Woz and everybody in the Homebrew Computer Club, you wanted your own computer. But it's interesting that you also had kind of this greater vision of computers for all.
Yes, computers for the masses.
Yeah.
I always thought of it as the fundamental motto of Apple was power to the people.
Yeah.
And what does that mean in this case? It means putting the power of tech that's implicit in technology, putting it in a form that makes that power accessible to human beings, to ordinary people. So put the power of technology into the hands of people in the way that empowers them. So empowerment to follow your dreams using stuff that we have provided you. was always, to me, the core of the Apple ethos.
We had Lee Felsenstein on the show a couple of weeks ago. He said exactly the same.
Yeah.
The same thing.
Good.
Because we're all a bunch of hippies.
No,
No?
actually, no. We were perhaps unusual in various ways.
Yeah.
And some people have been hippies, but not all of us. You know that the initial meaning of nerds was a person who is so involved in their highly obscure topic
Right.
that they are completely socially inept. And they
Right.
don't dress right, they don't act right, and so
Right.
forth.
Right.
Okay.
You were nerds.
So there were a lot of nerds in that we were people who were deeply involved in an area of endeavor that most people didn't understand and most people didn't really care about.
Right.
You know, it's not Sunday football, it's not politics,
Right.
it's not dates and making out. So, you know, not interesting. Okay?
I used to say that a geek.
But that doesn't make us hippies.
No. In fact, that's what's really interesting is the confluence of the engineers,
Right.
you know, with the little skinny ties and the pocket protectors, and the hippies, to create something that was transformative in the world. It was that intersection. In fact, Jobs said that himself on stage, the intersection of technology and the arts. That's what made Apple, and that really is the roots of it, isn't it?
Well, that is one of the defining characteristics of Apple and of the way we approach things. Was emerging of, if you will, of the arts and sciences, or the arts and technology. Yeah.
Now, Bill, you left Apple when the Apple II was the only thing making Apple a real company. And then you went off, you did some interesting things, and then you came back to Apple, I believe in 1981. Now, one of the things that really pisses me off whenever I hear casual references to Apple that are kind of derogatory and dismissive, one of these is that Apple stole the user interface for the Macintosh from Xerox PARC.
I hate it when they say that.
There was a great article in the May 16th, 2011 issue of The New Yorker by Malcolm Gladwell called The Creation Myth, where they attacked that whole false idea. But I'd love to hear it from you. Can you address this question once and for all about the influence of Xerox PARC's designs on the Macintosh UI?
Well, I can address it once, but I doubt it's going to be for all.
We'll do our best.
Yes.
We'll spread the word.
Okay. Well, Xerox had spent several years in their research group, Palo Alto Research Center, developing certain ideas and writing software and trying to make some products that were based upon those ideas. And among those ideas were icons on the desktop, putting things in folders, using the mouse that was, I think, developed by Doug Engelbert's team at SRI, and using icons, I said that, having windows and so forth, and having different things in Windows. Okay, so a group from Apple took a tour, got a demo, and saw that. I hear that they licensed what intellectual property there was, but I don't know if that's true. But in any case, when we brought the ideas back, we had to do a lot of creation based upon those ideas. For example, Windows in Xerox, you could divide the screen into parts and divide the screens into parts. So now you could have like 3 windows, if you will.
Tiling.
But if you, tiling, yes, they would be tiles. But if you deleted one, then you'd have a big empty space here, okay? And you'd have to redraw something else there.
Right.
Now, it was Bill Atkinson who created the software from scratch. And see, he didn't know that they didn't have overlapping windows. With the Macintosh, you can have windows and you can move them one on top of each other and move them around and change their order. He didn't know Xerox couldn't do that. So he wrote software that did that.
He thought you must be able to do that. Bill is an amazing
He just
guy.
assumed that was part of what they were showing, and it wasn't. You see, so that's a very clear example. The menu bar up at the top of the screen and having pull-down menus. Okay, that was Bill Atkinson's invention, and I've seen his notebooks where he went through, 20, 30 ideas of how do you provide menus on a computer that uses the mouse. And I saw many iterations of that before he finally settled on the menu bar along the top and the pull-down menus. Okay, so that wasn't part of the Xerox product. Okay, so those are just two of many examples of how we were inspired by some archetypes.
Right.
Okay, but we took those and pushed those way farther than Xerox had, and we also morphed some of them to mean different things or to be used in different ways.
We're going to take a break. We're talking to Bill Fernandez, Apple employee number 4, the man who introduced Woz and Jobs, UI designer who worked on QuickTime and the HyperCard, one of the greats.
HyperCard, yeah.
Let me show you a little clip. You're going to hate this, but I'm going to show it to you anyway. This is not from the most recent Jobs movie, but the Ashton Kutcher Jobs movie. Do you have my screen? Yeah. Here's a little clip.
Plus. Oh. We got a problem.
Huh?
We gotta figure out what to do with all these employees. You know Bill.
Been too long, Woz.
Bill Fernandez.
How are you? Good to see you. How is
Oh, this
it?
is my friend Daniel Cocky.
Hey, heard a lot about you. How you doing?
Cocky from India, of course. I've heard a lot about you too. Don't touch that.
It's Chris Espinosa, the kid down the street I was telling you about.
Nice to meet you, fella. This is gonna be so cool.
As fictionalized as that is,
so
it
glad
still
to
gives
hear
me
it.
a thrill.
Yeah.
It's like when they first Star Trek movie and they got the old gang back.
Yeah.
And they come out of the elevator. There's this thrill of wow.
Yeah.
The creation myth. We're going to talk about that and your opinion because of the newest Steve Jobs movie. I'm curious. Well, actually, I know what you think, but I'm going to ask you anyway.
You don't.
I don't. Good.
No.
I'd love to hear what you think. Bill Fernandez is our guest. We're going to have more and Mike Elgan joining us, and it's great to have you back where you belong here
Great
in
to
the
be
Twit
here.
studio. Our show today brought to you by Epson and the amazing Epson EcoTank printer. I got to praise Epson. Talking about the good old days. Of course, that was my first dot matrix printer, the MX80. And all along, Epson innovated. They created great new products. They brought precision core technology, which was their high-end industrial inkjet technology, 40 million drops a second. I mean, it's just kind of doesn't even, it's like magic to create incredible text. And now, I love this. They're saying, you know what? We're going to reinvent inkjet printers. We're going to replace the inkjet cartridge in our new EcoTank printers with an ink tank and ink bottles or bags that you fill up the ink tank. In the box, you have enough ink to print, well, it depends on the printer, but as much as 20,000 pages without refilling. That's the big one you're looking at right now for your work group. Take a look. We just bought at home the ET4550. That's a perfect home printer. It's an all-in-one. And, of course, because it's precision core, it's high speed. I'm talking, like 3 seconds a page, something like that. It's really fast, very quiet, crisp, laser quality black text, great colors, auto two-sided printing. It's got that document feeder, 30-page document feeder. It works with Apple's AirPrint and Google Cloud Print, all the wireless. You can print from your phone, you can print from your tablet. And it comes with about the equivalent of about 50 ink cartridge sets, enough to print 8,500 pages. In the box, you're loaded and ready to print for up to 2 years. I love it. I was so happy to set that up and say, that's it. I won't be putting more ink in for some time. I want you to take a look. You'll see them in your local stores. Epson.com/EcoTank is the website if you want to learn more. Transform the way your home, your office, your work group prints for the best combination of ease and value. The new Epson EcoTank printers. That's Epson, you know how to spell it, EPSON.com/EcoTank. And we love Epson. We thank them for innovating for the last 30 or 40 years and creating the best printers ever. That's Epson in my house. That's it. That's all I use for my photographs, for my work, for everything. Epson.com/EcoTank. Bill Fernandez is our guest on Triangulation. So great to have one of the legends in Apple history, in Silicon Valley history, in the history of the personal computer, Mike Elgan, joining me. I insisted that Mike come in because Mike said, have you ever talked to Bill? And I said, no. And I said, let's do it.
I was stunned that you'd never got, he's perfect guy for this show.
Absolutely,
So.
absolutely. So,
So you were talking about Epson. You might be interested to know that as I recall, the first printer that the Mac ever printed to was an Epson dot matrix printer. This
No
was in the
kidding.
days before inkjets.
before the
Yes,
image
and-
writer even.
Yes, well, the image writer was something that we, Apple, designed. We had
Right.
it built overseas, but we designed that. But while the Mac was still in development, we had to print on something, right?
I
And
bet
so,
it was an MX80.
that sounds like a familiar number.
Yeah.
And so I was the first person to get a printer working, as I recall, with the Macintosh, and it was an Epson dot matrix printer.
Was that hard to do? Did you have a parallel port? I'm trying to even remember.
No, we had a serial port, and I think we had a serial printer with a COM port on it, and I don't remember exactly what I had to do, but I did everything, and it got it working. And
it was
up,
fun.
And then I think Andy Hertzfeld probably wrote the driver software, or Larry Kenyon. Yeah.
Hertzfeld was, of course, responsible for QuickTime and Quick Draw and the low-level graphics primitives, right, for the Macintosh?
Not quite.
No. Atkinson was.
Bill Atkinson did Quick Draw.
Quick Draw,
which
that's
was
right.
all the software routines that allow people to draw things to the screen, including the windows and the menus and the graphics and the icons and stuff.
Right.
He was the guy who did all of that, or the vast majority of it. Andy Hertzfeld was the man behind the toolbox and really the driver of the user interface to a large extent.
Right. The toolbox was so. I remember I got my first Mac in 1984, and I got the Apple, the ROM documentation, a bunch of notebooks.
Yeah. The developers' manuals.
Yes,
Yeah.
and MPW.
Yeah, inside Macintosh.
Inside Macintosh. I have it on my bookshelf, actually, still.
So,
and it was so elegant and so beautiful. And the 68,000 processor, compared to the Z80 and the 8088, was so elegant and beautiful. It was just a dream.
Yeah.
And you kind of overlooked the fact that you'd have to put floppy in after floppy just to copy a file. And I mean, you just overlooked those because you knew you were looking at something that was revolutionary. And I stared through I pressed my nose against the window at the computer store looking at Lisa going, oh, $10,000. Oh, I'll never be able to get that. But when I could go and use my Macy's card, which is how I got it, and $2,500 later have a Macintosh.
Wow.
There it is, inside Macintosh.
yeah.
Somebody put a lot of those tabs. Somebody spent a lot of work putting those in.
I know.
Look at that.
And that's the beautiful original icon
Yeah.
for the Macintosh.
So when you look at that Ashton Kutcher clip, does that resonate with you in a moment in time when Steve Jobs said, we need some help? Or is it made up completely?
Well, the way I look at that movie is that it is a piece of fan fiction.
Yes.
Where fans of Apple have created a story that recites the themes that stand out in their minds. Many of them are stereotypes, and it's kind of a caricature, a loving caricature of Apple. So I don't expect it really to be accurate or a documentary. So from that standpoint, it's completely inaccurate. On the other hand, I think that clip expressed some of the garage environment, how non-professional our environment was, and how casual we were, how friendly we were, how engaged we were with each other. Yes.
And some of the joy and the joy of it.
And it also shows that many people came together, okay? Because as soon as you start making a company, the work multiplies, the skill sets you need multiply, the number of hours a day multiply, so the number of people you need multiply, right? So that clip showed, part of the essence of that time, which was the multiplication of people being involved in a multiplication of ways.
Bill, how did you like the other two Steve Jobs movies? The Pirates of Silicon Valley and the most recent one written by Aaron Sorkin.
Well, actually, I never watched either of those. I think Pirates of Silicon Valley, came out when I was living in Japan.
That one felt pretty good. That was more a history.
Yeah.
It felt like.
The latest one sounds to me like probably a reasonable representation or attempt at representing, a slice of Apple culture at that time. So from that standpoint, I'd be interested in seeing it.
Why haven't you seen it?
There's another standpoint is that Steve Jobs was my best friend, and I'm really sad.
Yeah.
And it makes me sad when I see pictures of him, and to see a whole movie about him, reminding me minute after minute of what a precious friend I've lost. Is not an experience I want.
The good/bad news is that I doubt this movie will remind you of Steve Jobs at all. So
it's a fiction. It's a work of not fan fiction, by the way. because Aaron,
Right.
Aaron,
it's
I don't
not.
think likes technology, and I think a lot of it was to kind of say how kind of
Yeah.
soul-sucking it
Yeah,
was
yeah.
to work at Apple, not so much maybe the actual experience.
Yeah.
There were many aspects, many dimensions of working, particularly in the Macintosh group. I still have a sweatshirt that says, 90 hours a week and loving it. Okay. Well, we worked 90 hours a week, but I'm not sure we loved it. We loved what we were working for. It was a real act, a work of love
Yeah.
by all of us.
Yeah.
But working so hard, so many hours, burning out so many people was not, the best part of working on the Mac.
Yeah.
Bill, you worked on QuickTime, you work in the Mac OS, you worked on HyperCard, and you have a patent related to the HyperCard.
I do.
We tend to think that technology always gets better. We replace the old and busted with the new hotness, and it always just gets better and better. But that's not true.
No, not in
Sometimes,
the case of HyperCard.
yeah, sometimes we replace superior products and technologies with inferior ones. Why isn't there anything like HyperCard in existence
kill
today?
it.
And
I'd kill
why
that.
don't you
Yeah.
launch a new type of HyperCard? That would help me a
Well,
lot personally.
Yeah, there actually are children of HyperCard, and there have been a number of them. And the one that is still alive is called Live Code. Now, it was Revolution and then Run Revolution and now Live Code, but they're very much alive. It's a bunch of developers, I think, in Scotland. And I was actually just using Live Code the other day to cob up a little piece of software I needed to drive an electronic signal generator for one of my experiments.
So HyperCard, the notion of HyperCard was it was a stack of cards, and you could very
Right.
easily. And remember, this was before anybody had experienced the World Wide Web.
Right.
It wasn't inspired by the World Wide Web. In fact, it might have inspired Tim Berners-Lee a little bit.
Well, in fact, when people tried to explain what the web was, they said, well, it's like HyperCard.
Like HyperCard, yeah.
It was easy for somebody who wasn't a programmer to create stacks. My dad, who's a geologist, created a stack of Darwin. He would taught a class in Darwin, so he created a stack of Darwin's Voyage of the Beagle. And he could do that without any programming. I, who did a little programming, I was able to write the little, what do they call those? The little
X functions and X commands.
X commands, extensions that
Right.
you could write. You could code them in, I guess it was Pascal at the time.
Yes,
There it is.
was Pascal.
Yeah, and it was just amazing. I mean, this was kind of the promise, I think, of Xerox PARC, of the star of the Alto, of the demo to end all demos. It was.
Well, you're putting a lot of things together there. That lead from one to the other, but don't necessarily work together.
Oh, but
for example, the work at Xerox was all oriented towards business,
Yeah,
empowering
right.
business office workers to work better.
Yes.
Okay, which is different than the work of HyperCard.
Yeah.
Now, HyperCard is a child of those concepts because it uses Windows and icons and the mouse and so forth. But the purpose of HyperCard was to make it possible for non-programmers to make their own software,
Amazing.
which is not office people to do their work better.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah, it was in fact, the whole ethos of Apple in those days was the opposite of IBM and Steve Jobs' middle
Yeah.
finger and all. We've seen all
And
of that
Apple
stuff.
has been very poor at selling to business.
Right.
Yes.
But which Bill Gates was very happy about.
Yes.
Yes.
Left him an opening.
Yeah.
But Apple always said this is a computer for the rest of us. And, I think the rest of us could be office workers, just not in the office, right?
Yeah.
Well, and there have been a lot of places where office workers and knowledge workers have brought their Macs into the office,
Right.
and the diseases spread.
Yeah.
Or the healing influences spread, however you want to look at it. That from the grassroots has basically insisted on having Apple products, and that they have grown in number in many offices and businesses.
Bill, at the risk of sounding like a psychiatrist, I want to talk about your mother. Did your mother influence Steve Jobs' design sensibility?
Yes.
Well, tell us about your mom. That's interesting.
Steve was over at my house and I was over at his house so much of the time, so many days of the week during a period of our life, junior high school and early high school, that my mom was kind of a mom to him and she considered Steve to be her 5th son. You know, she gave birth to 4 sons, and then Steve was kind of adopted. Steve was at our house a lot. Now, my mom had a really great design sense, and among other things, she studied Japanese culture at Stanford and Japanese art. And my grandfather had collected a number of Japanese woodblock prints by an artist named Hasui Kawase. And we always had the walls of our house finished in burnished Philippine mahogany, and we always had a bunch of Japanese woodblock prints on the walls throughout the house, and we had restrained, tasteful decoration of the furniture and the couches and the carpeting and so forth. And Steve was definitely very much influenced by that sense of beauty, of austerity, of lots of rectangular things juxtaposed with organic things like flowers and flower arrangements and so forth. Yeah, there was very much a part of his education in design and beauty.
Interesting. And you know, it also needs to be pointed out for context that in the 80s, the Japanese design sensibility came rushing into the United States, and lots of people were exposed to it. But this is well before that. This is when a kid, you know, living in a suburb, you know, in a track house, would never encounter a Japanese-influenced home or design. And so that must have been
very unique.
Yeah,
yes.
Yeah. Interesting. And tell us about your father. What did he do at Stanford?
Well, my father got a law degree at Stanford, and then he became a lawyer, and he was a trial lawyer for many years, very successful, and then became a municipal court judge, and then became a superior court judge in California. And that was his profession until he retired.
So that's interesting. You didn't come, unlike Woz, you didn't come from an electronics or a technology background.
No. And aside from Dad giving me a space in the garage and having a wall built and electricity wired in and a light put there, basically I had to do everything else myself, build my own workbench and learn by doing.
They were supportive, it sounds like.
Oh, yes.
And was Dad a woodworker?
No, not at all.
You know, I find it interesting that you love woodworking, because really what you were doing in some ways was physicalizing the abstract and building it almost in much of the same way a woodworker does.
Yeah. One of my fun projects about 20 years ago when I moved into my current house was I couldn't find any computer desk that met my needs, so I built my own. And I designed it and I built it and I did all the woodworking things like laminating wood and cutting it in shapes, and then I mixed up some custom stain to stain it the color I want, and then I top finished it and everything, and that was fun. That was my last big woodworking project.
The first Apple I was in a wooden case, wasn't it? Did you have anything to do with that?
Well, the first Apple I, there were a couple of stages of the Apple I. Initially, Woz was just giving the circuits away on paper, the schematics away at the Homebrew Computer Club. Jobs convinced him that to help him make a printed circuit board so that they could just sell the printed circuit boards. And I think at a time they were thinking, well, we'll just sell the printed circuit board and a bag of parts, but they decided to go to skip that and just have the parts all soldered into the board and for us to test them so people could buy working boards. Make it much easier to have, there's that green thing in the middle of that picture. That's the Apple I board. And you notice that to make it work, you had to add some transformers. Those are the 2 boxes on the right. And you had to add a monitor, which was the TV in the background. And we always had to figure some way, how do you get a TV to act as a monitor? That was always a question. And then you had to get a keyboard. That was in the foreground. Okay. And then I have no idea what that box with the black and white things on the left. That's
the self-destruct button.
Looks like somebody used an Apple to do a game show or something. Yeah.
Okay. So this instead of taking a schematic and say, how do I lay out a board and how do I get all the parts and stuff, you could buy the board already working, but you still had to add some things around it. Well, then people wanted to go the next step. So we explored, how do we put this board into a case? we also had a lot of our users saying, I've created this case, or I think you need a case. I've designed one, or I've made a prototype. Here, how about this? Yeah, this is a lot of people. Yes, some people did that.
A briefcase.
They would, they take a briefcase, and you see the cassette recorder that was used for saving and loading programs. The green board was the one that we sold. The keyboard was something they had to provide themselves.
So the green board was the thing that you sold at the bite shop, right? Pre-populated.
Yes, the green board. That's all you got.
That's all
for $666. Yeah.
But that was a big deal at the time. You didn't.
That was a huge deal.
Yeah.
It was an excellent price, fantastic functionality, and a far lower barrier to ownership of an actual working computer.
Yeah.
Now, I mentioned earlier you left Apple in '78. You went off and had some fun elsewhere. Then you returned in 1981. They restored your official designation as Apple employee number 4. In reality, you were Apple employee number 1, though, weren't you?
Well, it depends upon how you look at it. After Woz and Jobs Incorporated, I was the first person they hired. So I was the first full-time permanent employee of Apple Computer. Now, one could think that Woz, Jobs, and Mike Markkula were the first 3 employers of Apple Computer. So it makes sense that there are badge numbers 1, 2, and 3.
Right.
Now, also, before Apple Incorporated, when Jobs was creating the first run of Apple I boards, he hired his sister Patty and his friend from Reed College, Daniel Kotke, to do things like take bags of parts and separate them out into separate kits so he could provide a board and a kit to a small company who was going to stuff the parts into the board and solder them in. And that was run by some woman who got a bunch of housewives to do this on their kitchen tables. So that's where all the Apple Ones, the first run, were actually assembled. So she would get all these boards and all these little bags of parts that were kitted up, and she would distribute them to her housewives who were going to, on their kitchen tables when the husbands were away at work, solder parts into these boards. And then she'd collect them and give all the assembled boards to us, and then we had to test them.
We're talking to Bill Fernandez, who we can now say officially Apple employee number 4, but the first employee.
Yeah.
Yes. Well, first full-time permanent employee.
Yeah.
And I think it's fair to say that Patty and Daniel were part-time temporary employees.
Yeah. We're going to take a break, come back and talk some more. If you don't mind, and you can say no to this, I'd love to hear some of your stories about Steve Jobs. And
we can try.
Yeah. If we don't all burst into tears, we'll do our best. It's a safe space, though, Bill. It's a safe space. I want you to know.
Thank you. Just a couple of intimate friends and the internet.
Exactly, and a few. Don't worry, other people. But you know what? I'll tell you one thing. We were in the when Steve passed. We were in the middle of this show, and who was I interviewing? Somebody who knew Steve, and we stopped immediately. Was it Kevin Marks? No, I don't think so. Anyway, we stopped him. He had worked at Apple. Maybe it was Kevin Marks. Yeah, he had worked at Apple. He did QuickTime. And we stopped immediately, and just the whole community, our audience, everybody, we just talked for 8 hours. Yeah. And it was a really moving time. And I remember then the following week watching the ceremony at the Apple campus, and it was just incredible.
And I believe I was on Twit the Sunday after that.
Were you?
And that was a hell of a twit, too, because that's all we talked about.
Yeah. So as I said, you're among friends. Might be a lot of them, but you're among friends who share your love for Mr. Jobs. Our show today brought to you by something really cool. The Automatic. I have one in my car right now. I've actually had one for some time. You have one too?
I do.
This is, we talk about home automation. Actually, that's one of Bill's interests. We'll talk about that in a little bit. This is car automation. And so the idea is almost all cars made since 1996 have a port, the onboard diagnostic port, the OBD2 port. It's in your car, but you may never have seen it. It's visible if you know where to look. It's under the steering wheel, kind of low down. This goes in your OBD2 port and then changes your relationship with your car. It's not just for the mechanic anymore. Suddenly, you can see what's going on in your car. Now, this is the new automatic, the second generation. And it's really, really cool. Your car now is connected to your iPhone or your Android phone. It will tell you things like, what is that little light that keeps showing up on the dashboard? What does that mean? It'll tell you where you parked your car. It'll integrate with your Nest thermostat. I love this feature. You get home, it'll turn up the heat or the air conditioning, depending on the time of year. You can use if this, then that. I use my Amazon Echo. You can say to your Echo, how much gas is left in the car? And it will tell you, because the automatic knows all. It is an amazing, cool device that you'll find many, many uses. If you do business travel and you want to log mileage in your car, this will do it automatically with apps like Concur and Expensify. There's a total API and interface. You have Apple Watch support. You have Pebble Watch support. And this is nice. There's no monthly fees. You buy it for 99 bucks. You get the software for free, and then you're going. Actually, did I say $99.95? No. If you use our special offer code TWIT, you get 20% off. Bam, boom, ba-ding.
And you should know that it pays for itself, because you can set it to remind you when you're driving away that uses too much gas. It will beep. You can set it in the app and say, when I really hit the gas and accelerate, or when I really brake hard, when I do those kinds of things that, and then
like
over time, the savings in gas will pay for the device.
Yeah, I should actually, let me open my app, because I have it on here. And it'll probably give me, it gives you grades for your performance. I'm not getting a good grade.
Yeah, I think I'm flunking out.
But it tells you, this is my last trip, how many miles. Well, this is really useful. It tells you how much the gas cost for that trip. And boy, is that an eye-opener.
Yeah.
When you realize that the trip to work cost me 50 cents in gas, and I'm only a couple of miles away, that trip to the grocery store cost you $1.48, that really opens your eyes. The trip to the airport cost you $15. And suddenly you realize this isn't free. This is, it's just really fantastic. The score is useful too. In fact, they have interfaces for software that helps teen drivers become better drivers. So there's a lot of useful information in here. I got a bad score, 78 this week. 8 hard brakes, 7 hard accels, but I'm proud to say no time over 70 miles an hour. This is, yeah, well, and there you go. That's because the speed limit where I live isn't that high. Believe me, if I were on the highway, it'd be another matter entirely.
Yeah, you're only doing 65 in the 35 mile an hour
there you
zone.
go. There you go. Automatic is awesome. They will never sell your data. It's completely private. I almost don't even want to say that, but now in this day and age, we kind of have to tell people this is your thing. Automatic.com, just like it's spelled, automatic.com/twit for 20% off. I'm gonna love this. By the way, my score places me in the bottom 28% of all automatic drivers. I stink at. So I'm gonna. But that does incent you to drive more economically, drive more intelligently. I think it's great. Automatic, and really great when you do this with the new drivers, with teenagers. I wish we'd had this when the kids were learning to drive. Automatic.com/twit. Your car is smarter than you think. Bill Fernandez is our guest, and such a cool person to talk to. The fourth employee at Apple, a man who introduced his good buddy Steve Wozniak, who was into technology, into and then it was called electronics. And his friend Steve Jobs, they were both all at Homestead High. In some ways, I guess you could say that you planted the seed that became Apple Computer. Worked at Apple for many years on many projects, including HyperCard. I'm downloading live code right now. I'm so glad to hear about this. Looks really interesting. They have an open source version too, which is really really cool.
Yes,
it's cross-platform, so that's cool.
It's great because you can write one thing, and I haven't done this, but they say you can write one thing and have it run on Mac, Windows, I think Linux, and maybe Android and iOS.
Yeah,
which is pretty amazing to be able to take sort of the nth generation of HyperCard and use it to produce software that run on a lot of different platforms.
And like HyperCard, it has extensions and all sorts of stuff. So, how did you meet Steve? Were you both students?
Yes. Cupertino Junior High School, 7th and 8th grade in California. was right behind my house, and I think it was probably partway through 8th grade that this new kid came into school. And we found that he and I shared a number of social properties. One, that we were very cerebral, we were deep thinkers, we were very smart, we were not interested in the social inanities, we were not interested in playing social games to become accepted, and so we were pretty much two lonely islands in the sea of teenage, whatever it was that went on there, of teenage cliques. So we met and we gravitated towards each other and started hanging out, and that was the beginning of our friendship.
You bonded.
Yes.
What was your sense of him when you first met him?
All those many years ago,
Do you remember?
I don't know.
You don't remember that first meeting?
I just know my sense in those early days that we were both, compatible.
Yeah.
And it turned out that we were kindred souls, and we got along really well together, and we started spending all of our free time together.
Was he an influence? Did the reality distortion field make its appearance in
When did
junior
that get
high?
born?
No. In those days, we were just kids. We were both clueless young teens. We spent a lot of our time just walking down the streets, talking about things, talking about life, talking about girls, talking about the meaning of life, talking about philosophy, just trying to make sense of things. So we spent endless hours walking, and you'll find out the people who have been close to Steve walking around and talking about serious stuff is a big part of his modus operandi.
That's a thread, isn't it, that goes through all of the stories about Steve.
Yeah.
The other
I was there first.
You were the first walking part. The other thing that I remember very well is he would tell these stories about the early days, and he'd say every time he came up with something like the blue box or the Apple one, Steve would say, "We can make a business out of that." Yeah. Did you know at that time that Steve had this great business mind?
It was in high school that he, to me, started showing signs of being a businessman. And it was kind of middle of high school that, no, that's not him, actually. I've seen that photo before.
It's not him. No, show it again, though. Who the hell is it? It doesn't even look like him. That could be Ashton Kutcher.
No, wait a minute. No, maybe it is him. Okay, yeah, that could be him.
Where are you? Are you in that picture?
I'm not in.
It's math class. It looks like. Oh no,
I don't think I'm in this picture. No, this is electronics.
Yeah.
The kid on the left, that's Phil Wood. The other three I recognize in the middle,
so
but I don't remember their names.
Was this the club?
No. These are all people in the electronics class. The teacher on the left, that's John McCullum, who taught the electronics classes.
That's so neat.
And
look at the size of that slide rule.
Classroom with the slide rule.
I've been trying to find. We had one of those in my high school.
A giant one.
Yeah, I've been trying to find one of those, giant aluminum Picket slide rule for years, because I want it for the studio. Those things are awesome.
And in early high school, that was a little 6-inch plastic Picket slide rule was the height of computing technology for us and for engineers, really.
Pre-calculated.
And
they were so expensive.
what I always lusted after was instead of a 6-inch long made out of plastic, was a 12-inch long made out of bamboo and ivory made by Keffler and Esser. The K&E slide rule. That was the standard among engineers and scientists. In those days, and that's what we lusted after as a piece of engineering, an engineering tool that would help us. You see,
with a perfect
but by the end of high
cursor
school,
on it. Yep, I remember very well.
By the end of the high school, we already had the HP 35, the world's first scientific calculator. Well, maybe not the first, but a pocket scientific calculator that just blew slide rules, out of the water totally.
Right.
Okay.
Now, I've always believed that Steve Jobs, if he didn't happen to be born in Silicon Valley right at the dawn of the computer age and personal computer revolution and all that, he would have been a writer in any other age. I've always respected him as a writer, as a wordsmith. His famous ability to coax a lot of work out of people, his ability to spin and market. He wrote the ad that was, here's to the crazy ones. I think he was a brilliant writer.
Wrote that?
Steve Jobs wrote that ad.
Really?
Yes.
Yeah.
Himself.
At least that's the story.
Yeah. And he actually recorded it before Richard Dreyfuss was, and his recording was actually better than Richard Dreyfuss's.
I thought so. Yeah.
No offense to Richard Dreyfuss, but was he a good writer in school? Or was he interested in books, literature, and writing?
Steve Jobs was counterculture.
Yeah.
Steve Jobs was against formality, was against authority. Steve was an early member of a club that got constituted as one of the clubs at the high school. A couple of his hippie-ish, not truly hippies, but hippie-ish people, friends of his, created the Buck Fry Club. Now, I don't know what their stated charter was, and we had the chess club and the Chinese club and the cooking club and the theater club and the choir club. He did the Buck Fry Club, okay? Now.
Wait a minute, what's that?
Now, the name of our principal at that time was Warren Brild. Brild, right?
Brild, yeah.
Okay. Reverse the first two letters in the Buck Fry Club.
Yes, we can do that, and we'll stop now. That's hysterical. That's hysterical.
I've never heard that.
He had I'm maybe the only one who knows anymore.
Wow.
He had long, hippie-ish hair. He wore a T-shirt to school when everyone else was wearing something nicer. He wore torn jeans to school when everyone was wearing something nicer. And he was always kind of against, authority and authoritarianism. Yeah. And
now I know I identify with him because that's a picture of me in high school.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Totally get it.
So one of the things that infuriated me about the most recent Aaron Sorkin Steve Jobs movie was that they kind of made him out to be an angry jerk that everybody had a beef with, and it was clearly a one-dimensional portrait. It said, I think, more about Aaron Sorkin than about Steve Jobs.
Absolutely.
And what really pissed me off about that movie was the fact that here is this guy who you can demonstrate numerically that he was the CEO of a company which is now the most valuable company in history. So he is arguably the greatest CEO in history. I would certainly make that argument. He's incredibly successful. He was successful in making it possible for you guys to launch an actual company. He was successful in a number of ways, but then after he left, went to Next and then came back. That's when I think he really demonstrated and by then had learned how to be the CEO he was to become. And there's no arguing with his ability to get people to make great products, to build a great company. He was a great CEO, and the movie completely missed it. They weren't even curious about what made him successful as a CEO, not at all. How would you characterize the personality traits that Steve Jobs had that made him successful at Apple?
Do you mind if I give it like an extended answer to that?
Please do.
Okay. The Steve Jobs who died was not the Steve Jobs who founded Apple. Steve went through many stages of development and learning along that path. He started out basically incompetent. He ended up hugely competent, and he went through a lot of developmental phases along the way. So that's one thread of the answer. Another thread of the answer is that when he started out, he was kind of a counterculture-oriented, entrepreneurially-oriented person who you could say was not fully socialized. Now, over the years, he learned better how to deal with a wide variety of people in a wide variety of ways, but not in all ways, and not all times, and not all people. So there were times that he was angry. There were times that he seemed mean and so forth. But there were also times when he was very loving and very supportive. So that's the third thread, is that Steve is a very multi-dimensional person. And the general populace can only handle like 2 or 3 things when you say, well, what are the defining characteristics of this person? A rock star, actor, or something. He said, oh, well, he made all the Rocky movies. Okay? And that's all you know of this person. Right. Okay? Was he a good father?
Right.
Was he a loyal friend? You don't know. Where is politics sane or insane? It's kind of irrelevant to most of the characterizations we have of most of our celebrities. Okay. Steve was a very multi-dimensional person, as are we all. And in different contexts, he was either better or worse at, playing the role he needed in that context. So that's another thread. Okay. Another thread is that when he founded Apple, and as he became the president early on and the prime mover of Apple, he didn't know really how to nicely get what he needed out of people to take the company to the next step. And there were, 100 steps a day that we had to go through in the startup ages. Okay, so he was able to jump into a position of power and a position of responsibility where there were large consequences, both for his dream and for the consequences to his investors and to his employees and to his public, if he made mistakes. So that puts a lot of pressure on you. Okay, so he had that, trying to learn how to be effective when, all you had were what your parents taught you about how to be a nice person, but not necessarily how to be effective in business. Okay? Here's another thread. Steve was always very entrepreneurial. And going back to high school, when he was in the Buck Fry Club with his long hair and his torn T-shirt and his torn jeans and his Birkenstocks, he was also working deals. And he learned making deals and negotiating from his father, who was really good at this. Okay, and he was the person who would have this great stereo when he couldn't really afford it. Well, how did he do that? Well, he found a great stereo with a broken headset connection at a garage sale. He bought it like for $5. He fixed the headset, and now he had like a $300 stereo that none of the rest of us could afford. He had what those of us interested in audio lusted after, which was an Otari brand 2-track open reel 1/4-inch tape deck, in his room. And he said, how did he do this? He lives in this tiny little room. He has blue-collar parents. He doesn't have a job. How did he get this? Well, he found a way to work a deal. So it was clear to me in high school that he had the ability to be a businessman. Now, I thought that he would end up being the businessman kind of like in the show The Office. They're selling paper at that company. I could see him being a really good businessman, at selling paper or fax machines or, something, not necessarily being the entrepreneur that founded what Apple has become. Okay, so when I look at Steve Jobs' life, I see all of these threads woven together and all of these threads developing in parallel over time. Yeah, I'll stop there and let you ask questions.
That's a really good point, and I think that's exactly right. I mean, but I think you could almost say that we've all, we hope, improved over time and become better. And one hopes the good traits emerge and the bad traits are left behind. Did you get a sense that he was, I asked you about it, was Jobs also kind of something special and magical and genius? It sounds like he might have been.
Yes, he had a different kind of genius. It was a combination of traits. One of them is being very entrepreneurial. Yep. Another is having a lot of drive. He would drive to his goals and not want to let things get in the way of accomplishing those goals. He had the chutzpah to walk up to people, a long-haired, hippie-like guy in Birkenstocks and torn jeans, and say, you should give me stuff. So, for example, when we were buying parts early in Apple, we needed to buy this laundry list of parts for the Apple I first run of products and then the second production run. He would call up the distributors of electronic parts in the area, Hamilton Avnet, Elmar Electronics, and he would talk to their salespeople and say, look, you should sell me these parts and you should give them to me on terms that allow me to sell my thing first and then pay you back like after we've gotten our income. So give me like 30 days or 90 days to pay this off, which is something you normally only do, or a distributor will only normally do for Hewlett-Packard.
Right.
An established company, a known quantity, successful with a big bank account, with established credit. He could convince them to do this and say, look, we're going to be great. And if you want our business in the future, you need to do this for me now. Okay, he had the ability to do that. I don't.
Sweet. Yeah.
Okay, and that was one of the several characteristics.
Yeah.
Okay, that he had. Now he also had this high sense of quality, and he got a lot of that from Hewlett-Packard. Hewlett-Packard being the standard of what does it take to make a quality product, and what do you aspire to in being the best in your industry, in the electronics industry. So it has to be great in a number of ways. It has to be built very well. It has to be robust. It has to actually work reliably. So reliability was a big deal. Has to be usable, has to be functional, has to do something very useful, and it has to be usable enough, it has to be in a form that your target audience could actually use it, and so forth. So all of those were elements of the high degree of quality that had to go into the products that he aspired to. And he didn't always know what that looked like, but he knew that's what he wanted. And he'd always drive until someone would say, okay, well, what about this? And he'd say, yes.
That's it.
That, if we did that, that fulfills my inherent vision, my inherent level of desire. Okay. He also had a characteristic of design sense. You remember that growing up in my house, he learned about Japanese aesthetics, about things that were lean and clean and that were more evocative rather than overpowering you with their opulence. In college, at Reed College, he learned about calligraphy and how the beauty of line and shape and form can come from something as simple as a pen on paper. Okay, he learned about typography and how in the Apple I we did what all the computers did in those ages, and we just had some basically dot matrix letters and numbers that we would put in a grid across the screen. But he learned about typography, how you could have letters with different shapes and forms and sizes and different styles and the different spacing. You know, in good typography, letters like a little lowercase l is put very close to the O. If you were going to write love, you would put L-O. But in the old dot matrix, they all had the same space. So the L would take up this much space, and the O would take up this much space. So you'd end up with a big empty space between the two of them. And it's not very pretty. But when you kern them in, to use typography, move them in so they have good spacing, and you do that and adjust the spacing before all the letters, then the sentence flows graphically and visually and takes on a beauty just as a piece of typography. It's like looking at Arabic calligraphy. You have no idea what it means, but you can tell whether it's beautifully done or not.
How technical was Steve Jobs? I think it's it's almost slanderous, but people, and they say this about Bill Gates too. Oh no, his technical expertise is overblown.
Yeah.
Doesn't sound like it. I mean, once you become a businessman, you're not going to be writing code. I hope.
Well,
not.
Bill Gates was a programmer first.
Right.
Okay, so from that standpoint, he's very technical.
Right.
And he did actually write a lot of the code, like the BASIC that we licensed from Microsoft. The floating point BASIC was, a lot of his code. So.
Yeah, Bill's very proud of how many lines of code he was able to have, and how few lines of code he was able to do. Stuff.
Steve, he took electronics courses, and he hung out with Woz and me, but he never became that technical in terms of the ability to engineer or design something.
Right.
What he did do was come to understand all the pieces that were involved in putting together a piece of technology and understanding the dynamics of those pieces, the parameters of those pieces. And then he would get people to provide those pieces. So he was really good at understanding all the pieces and their implications and say, okay, we need this and we need that. And I kind of see how that fits in and what impact that will have on the product or on the process of completing a product or on the price of a product. And so I can assemble the team that I need to build the product that I have in mind. And
you have to have somebody. I think one of the things that I agree, maybe the criticisms of Steve, and it's part of the Steve Jobs movie that Sorkin wrote, is that, but this is inevitable, it sometimes looks like it was a one-man show, Steve Jobs.
Not at all.
And of course it's not.
Right.
Not at all.
Not even close. And so that's one of the reasons I love having people like you on, to give credit where credit is due.
Let's do another Steve Jobs movie. And Bill can write the screenplay.
But, you know, I love Andy Hertzfeld. This guy is just a sweet, wonderful, warm guy and super talented.
His greatest claim to fame, of course, is he had designed the Circles interface on Google+.
Yeah,
people don't
he
know
went
that.
to Google+, that's right.
Yes.
Bill Atkinson, of course, a great photographer now. That's what he's doing.
Yeah.
But a genius. I mean, the stuff he did with Quick Draw, I mean, just incredible.
It's incredible. And I remember Bill Atkinson had a car accident. I think that his low-slung kind of sports car got crunched under a larger truck.
Oy.
And he ended up in the hospital. And then Steve Jobs went to visit him in the hospital, and Bill kind of woke up and said, "Don't worry, Steve, I still know how to do regions." And regions was what he invented as one of the core things that enabled the ability to do overlapping windows.
Right.
You know.
I remember regions very well. Did a lot of stuff with regions. Did you and Steve Jobs ever get in a fight?
No.
Interesting.
I can't remember anything, and as I try to dig in and see, was there a fight that I forgot about or discounted? No, I don't think we ever fought.
Because you know, that's the other maybe mistaken impression people get of him, is that he was very prickly and combative.
Yeah. Well, for example, you know, there are the stories about how when you didn't give Steve what he wanted, you know, he'd be very fierce and mean and so forth. So I'll say two things about that. One is he did not express himself diplomatically. So when someone presented something and he said, "This is excrement," what he's really saying is that I have a dream and this isn't it.
Yeah.
He's not saying that you're a terrible person. Now, that's the way it comes across, is that you're a failure. Okay? That's because he didn't know how to express himself in a socially acceptable and effective way. All right. So on the other hand, he never did any of that to me. And I remember when we were laying out the cubicles in our second building after Texaco Towers. That would be, we went to Bandley 4, then to Bandley 5, and I was laying out the engineering area, and I had filled it with cubicles and labs. And I took the plan to him, and he said, "Well, you know, Bill, we need to get like 5 more cubicles in here." And I said, "Steve, you know, I've worked my head off on this. I've tried it a number of ways. This is the most I can pack in." And he said, "Well, yeah, but we still need to get 5 more in." So I went away and I figured out a way to get 5 more in that did not destroy the usability of that space. Okay, and so I took it back and he was happy, and that was the extent of it.
But that's beautiful. See, he drove, and I think that was the other side of it, and many people report this. He drove you to do your best work and maybe even beyond what you thought you could do.
Yes, he drove me beyond what I thought I could do.
Yeah.
But he interacted with me in a way that, you know, he knew the kind of person I was. Okay, and we were also friends, and he knew that he wasn't upset, and there was no need. You know, another aspect of Steve was that a lot of people were, relatively speaking, stupid.
To him, compared to him.
In various ways.
Yeah.
And sometimes stupid is because they're just not very competent at their jobs. And this could be at Apple, or this could be, you know, somewhere else. This could be at a supplier or something like that, or just at a retailer who is, you know, trying to buy our products. You know, it could be anyone. I'm just giving you examples. There are people who didn't understand or didn't get the vision. There were people who were stupid in that way, of you don't see what I see. And in some cases, you know, should know better. Or there are people who would like to promote ideas or initiatives or solutions that just weren't at all on the table as far as he was concerned. And they just didn't take no for an answer. They didn't take a quiet no for an answer. Okay. So for all of those different classes of stupidity, he would be very short and rude to them. Okay.
Having been on that list. But I also, as a geek, understand that. He didn't have time for it. And
I don't, and it's mostly a point of I don't want to waste my time with things that are a waste of time.
Right.
So if I already know that I'm not going to do what you wanted, or I'm not going to sell your product in the Apple Store because your product does not fit in with our offering, and I've already told you that, and I've told it nicely, and I told you quietly, you know, and that's all the time you get from me.
Yeah. Yeah, I understand that.
As an example of, you know, and so some people, the salesperson might go away saying, "Oh, Steve was so mean to me." Well, no, you didn't get the message when he told you nicely.
Right. But you did get, I remember, you get the feeling when you're with him that he's the smartest guy in the room and kind of knows it. And unless you show that you are, you have to demonstrate that you have something to offer, or he's just not, not even going to consider it.
Yes, yeah, he had his plans, his desires, his objectives, his goals, and like I identified early in his life, and he would charge forward towards those goals.
He was driven,
and he didn't want to be distracted, didn't want to be derailed, didn't want to have obstacles, and so forth. And he would try to charge through to his goals. Okay? So, and if you can't get on board with that, and if it's part of your job to be on board with that, then he'd be very short with you.
Right. It's almost as if, and I almost hate to say this, but it's almost as if he knew he didn't have a lot of time.
No. I think that that was just the way he was.
Yeah. Well, none of us has enough time.
Because, you know, one of the things that made him successful as an entrepreneur when the Homebrew Computer Club was giving out his schematics, and he said, let's build a board and sell them. There was a huge amount of work, many steps of work to bring that into fruition. And he hustled.
Yeah.
Okay, so he had that hustle back in those days. I need to talk to this guy. I need to find out how to do this. I need to find a place to parts. I need to be able to afford this. I need to talk to this. I need to get this set up. We need to buy this. We need to have a workbench. We need to, get this guy hired. Okay, so he was just always running. Okay, so he had that hustle from the beginning.
Yeah, reminds me of my wife, actually.
He also understood that time is everything in technology. I mean, Bill Gates couldn't wait to finish the semester at Harvard, let alone graduate.
Well, he dropped out. He said, "That's it. I'm done. We got to write this basic, or we got to get in with the midst."
They both understood that. It's you got to do it now, or you're not going to do it. Yeah. He's been gone a few years now. How do you think the Apple of today is doing in continuing to realize Steve Jobs' vision for a company, for a line of products, and so forth?
Well, I think it's doing remarkably well in a number of ways, and I'm very worried about it in at least one way. But basically, they've done a great job of doing products that empower people, that are usable for people, of improving the technology using experience. For example, the App Store. Okay. Buying and installing and keeping up-to-date apps, whether on a phone or a computer, before the App Store was a nightmare. But having the App Store so that you can buy it and regularly download updates in a painless way is an amazing step forward in usability and in benefit to the user. Okay? Also, anything you buy, you can install on 5 computers, and you know that. So you don't have to say, well, does this license allow me to install it on 1 computer or 2 computers, or a desktop computer and a laptop, but not 2 desktop computers? All those variations are blown away by the one simple rule. Any 5 devices that you own or operate, you can install it on. So that's another instance of simplifying the equation. Okay, I think that happened while Jobs was still alive, but it's an example of how Apple has been making things easier for people to use higher and higher levels of sophisticated technology. And I think Apple's done a good job of pushing that forward.
We're talking to Bill Fernandez, Apple employee number 4. Actually, there's lots more, but I want to ask him about what he's doing right now with this Omnibotics thing, CEO of Omnibotics. Yeah, I know you're interested in home automation. That's another opportunity for Apple to do what it does so well, to make finally cut this Gordian knot of home automation. We can talk about that as well. But first, let me talk about investments. You have investments. You have savings, right? You ought to have investments if you have savings. I mean, savings doesn't mean putting it in the mattress or putting it in a bank. That's pretty much functionally the same thing, although the bank will charge you more in the long run than the mattress will. I want to talk to you about your long-term savings for your retirement, for your college tuition, for your kids, for your rainy day fund, maybe the down payment on a house you'd like to own someday. Those savings need to be invested. But boy, in this investment climate, you probably look at the stock market going this way and up and down and all around and wonder, well, how would I figure out how to do this? Maybe you think, I'll read all the books. That's what I did. I read all the books. I can do this myself. Bought a bunch of stuff. Forgot about it for 10 years. Went back and checked. Ooh, that didn't work out. Or maybe you say, oh, no, I'm going to use the experts. And you go and you get an investment advisor, and then you get the bill. 1%, 2%, as much as 3% sometimes of the money you've got invested every year. That means you have to earn 3% more just to break even. Not to mention hidden fees and transaction costs and all of that stuff. We've got a better way. It's a brilliant way. And as people who love technology, you're going to like this. You have an investment advisor based on all those books, but it's a computer, it's software, it's Wealthfront. Wealthfront uses software to trade for, and we're not talking day trading, we're talking long-term investment, the most efficient way. It does things that your paid stock advisor probably never heard of. Things that are like tax loss harvesting and direct indexing, things that are very sophisticated but give you the optimized, the best possible returns with the lowest possible tax bill. Wealthfront is remarkable, and it makes it easy for anyone to access world-class long-term investment management because they don't charge 1% or 2% or 3%. It's 1/4% a year, and there are never any additional fees. That's it. I'll give you a better deal in a second, though. I want you to go to wealthfront.com/triangulation and read up on this. Read about their advisors. The software is based on some of the best minds, people like Burton Malkiel, who wrote that Random Walk Down Wall Street. That was one of the books I read. Charles D. Ellis, The Investors, Winning the Loser's Game, the financial strategy for successful investing. These guys and their partners have more than 200 years of investment experience. They've written more than 16 investment books. They are widely regarded as the smart guys in the room, and they are the ones who designed this software. So you're getting there, and the thing is, because it's a computer, it's doing it faster than any human can. You know what you do? If you go to wealthfront.com/triangulation, you get a free portfolio. You can see how they would invest your money. They'll ask you some questions about your time frame, how risk adverse you are, things like that. And they'll show you what they would invest. You could start with as little as $500, so get your feet wet. But here's the best part. As a Triangulation listener, you're going to get your first $15,000 managed for free forever. What? That really makes this worth doing. Wealthfront.com/triangulation. Wealthfront.com/triangulation. 1/4%, and it's only on the investments greater than $15,000. That's really a deal. Give it a try. Costs you nothing to at least visit Wealthfront. And I want you to read up on it. This is too important to mess around with. Wealthfront.com/triangulation. Our guest is Bill Fernandez, Apple employee number 4, the man who introduced Woz and Jobs. We've been talking about so many interesting things. Yeah. But I got to ask you what this, what is it, Omnibotics?
Yes.
What you up to?
Well, it's a longer story than I'd hoped it would be. I've been designing other people's products for decades, and I really wanted to design my own products and bring products to market that I've been dreaming of that other people haven't been providing so that I could go into the store and buy them myself. And I've been interested in home automation and smart homes for a long time. And so I thought that as my first foray into entrepreneurship, I would design and build home automation products. And so that's where Omnibotics comes from. And the idea would be that we wanted over time to build out a family of products that could fill your home with technology piece by piece that would make it smart and would all work together to make life more convenient and automatic and so forth for you. We developed a concept for an initial family of products, and my partner and I, we went out and pitched a whole bunch of venture capitalists. And in the process, I learned a lot about how venture capitalism works and about the value proposition they need to see to make it worthwhile to invest, because they have responsibilities to try to make money. So they have to make their best guesses about, the ratios of what they invest versus the risk of not getting it back, and how much they thought you could eventually get back. And we got a lot of interest, but nobody felt that our value proposition for the venture capitalist was appropriate for them to invest. So my partner and I, we spent the next year investigating about a dozen other products, software or hardware, that we could bring to market. Eventually couldn't agree upon what we both wanted to do together, partially because he wanted to do something that could become as big as Apple over time, and my objectives were more modest. So we've recently signed over the assets to me, and I'm going to do a more modest product. Another product I've been dreaming of for a long time is a piece of gear for pro and semi-pro and prosumer audio people. Anyone who deals with a sound system, I think, will be interested in our box. It will be a kind of Swiss Army knife utility box that helps anyone who deals with sound systems solve a wide variety of problems that they routinely have to face and that are very frustrating to do. And I'm trying in the investigation stage to see what's the best way to approach this. Can I, where I live now in Albuquerque, find the people I need to do sheet metal, printed circuit boards, fabrication, engineering, business operations, and so forth? Or am I going to have to take it to China, for example, and get a turnkey manufacturer to do it for me? So I'm in the investigative stages, and hopefully soon we'll get into the development stages.
Somebody in the chat room pointed out that you said you had one concern about Apple going forward, but did we talk about your concern about Apple?
No.
Do you want to share it?
Sure. To put it in context, user interfaces are always evolving over time. And user interface styles, user interface rules are always evolving over time. And when we first started shipping the Macintosh user interface with windows and icons and the mouse, we had to explain a lot of things to people because nobody knew what this stuff was. And over time, we were able in successive generations to assume that people already knew what an icon was, or what the mouse was, or how to use it. And then we could go on and have them do something new. We had to explain the new thing, but assume that they already knew other stuff already. And so there's kind of like a rolling development of every year, what can we assume today that we couldn't assume last year about what our customers already know, or users of user interfaces already know? Okay. So in the early Mac days, for example, everything was very explicit. Everything tried to model something you'd have in your physical life. And over time, things have become much more abstract. Now we have a situation where you can look at a user interface, whether it's on the web or an application that Apple creates, or it's the Mac Finder, and there will be words in different letters, and some of them are links, and some of them are buttons, and some of them are labels, and some of them are indicators, and you have no clue which one each is. And that's an example of how, in so many ways, the Macintosh user experience is becoming something that you have to become an expert to use. You have to become a detective to use. You have to read the missing manual to figure out, oh, there are all these gestures that do things and that I need to know that aren't available. And you could go from one application to another, and on this application, a blue text in this corner is a button that does something important. In the other application, blue text in that corner is just a label that labels something. Okay, so we have lost a lot of the clues that used to tell users, this object is a button, this object is a label, this object is a menu, this object is an indicator that changes its state or its color or its size or something. So we're losing that, and I think making the Macintosh and the iOS user experience far less usable because of that.
Interesting. Even iOS, huh?
I mean, I would suspect that this is one of the things driving the mobile web, because iOS and mobile devices in general aren't as bad as desktop platforms, including OS X. And so
Well, you also have
younger
people
tend to
who-
go for the mobile ones,
Right.
in part because it's apps, it's simple, there's no file management, etc.
Have you seen the videos where some people took some children, some contemporary children, maybe in their early teens, sat them down in front of like Apple IIs, and they hadn't a clue how to use any of it?
What do we do?
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, part of the reason that that young people from teens through 20s to maybe 30s are so good at all this is because they get what's new and they learn what is new, but they don't necessarily learn what is old. So there's a whole bunch of learning to go into and how to use this new technology, where the buttons are, which things to push, or just the idea. If I just click on everything, I know that, I've learned that there are 5 different behaviors, and I'll click on everything, there you go, to find out, what the behavior this thing is doing in this screen. And on the next screen, it could have a different behavior, okay? But you kind of learn that by rote, and you internalize all of this learned implicit information about how to use or learn skills in how to use each piece of software. Now, someone who learned on an earlier generation of smartphones or on a different generation of smartphones like Android versus iOS won't know all those tricks. And if you're an older person in the 40s or above, you don't learn as fast. So it's harder for you to learn even the concept that you need to poke on everything and see what it does. Okay?
Unfortunately, people who are designing these interfaces are expert and live in this. They're immersed in it. And so I think often the people who design user interfaces are the wrong people because they're the experts. And so they end up designing something and they forget that some people don't know what that green button in the upper left-hand corner
Well,
what it does.
User interface design, I understand, has been taken over by Johnny Ive and his industrial design team.
Yeah.
And they're brilliant, excellent people, but I don't think they're as much user interface design people as they are
Hardware.
product design people.
Yeah.
And there's a difference in the skill sets and in the mindsets.
Yeah. Well, I want to thank you so much, Bill. You've given us a lot of your time, and I'm just thrilled. It's such an honor to talk with you and meet you, and we look forward to seeing what you do next. I'm an audiophile, so I'm very curious. I'll make sure I keep in touch.
Well, when I have prototypes, I'll ask you if you want to be a beta tester.
Good, I will. Bill Fernandez, CEO of Omnibotics and #4 employee at Apple. Great to have you. Thanks for joining us, Bill.
Thank you.
Take care.
Thank you very much.
And thank you, Mike Elgan, for not only suggesting Bill, but for coming in and helping out. And,
Thank you for having me.
It's great to see you. What are you up to these days?
Oh, just writing, lots of columns, doing a lot of blogging.
Still just as much on Google+.
I'm on Google+. I'm hanging in there. I'm going to be the last
The
guy
last
there.
man standing. But you know, if you want to follow Mike there, it's a good way. I mean, you've done a lot to help keep Google Plus alive. There's a lot of good content coming out there, including pictures of your baking and cheese making and everything else.
I had a big weekend. I made bread, olives, cheese, and even
those olives
kombucha.
look great.
Don't they? I was so shocked that they came out as well as they did. So they're really going to be good. I'll send you a jar.
The problem with olives is it's a lot of work.
Yeah.
Takes a long time.
Yes.
And they're so good, you eat them like that.
Yeah. That's right. Exactly.
That's true of anything that's really.
They theoretically last for months, but not in my house.
No. Well, stay in touch. Let us know what you're up to when you hit the road. Tell us so we can follow you. And of course, you got to come back beyond our shows and Twig and Twit and all of that.
Love to.
Thank you, Mike Elgan. Thank you, Bill Fernandez. And thank you for being here. We do Triangulation every Monday morning, 11 a.m. Pacific, 2 p.m. Eastern Time, 2100 UTC. Tune in if you want to watch live. Be in the chat room. Help us with questions. But if you can't, we do make on-demand audio and video available, of course, of all of our shows. Go to our website, twit.tv. In the case of Triangulation, it's twit.tv/TRI. We're also on YouTube, youtube.com/ I think Triangulation or Triangulation Show. You know, if you go to youtube.com/twit, what we're doing now is we're creating playlists. Like all our reviews are in a playlist there. We've got Twit Bits there, we've got Shorts, and then you can see over in the right-hand column all the different shows and subscribe to whatever ones you want if you want to use YouTube. You don't have to, because of course it's also a podcast, which means you can subscribe in your favorite podcast application and get it each week. And I wish you would, because I tell you what, every week is exciting and we learn and it's fun. And I'm so glad you can be here for Triangulation. We'll see you next time. Bye-bye.